It's funny how much things have changed. Like when you think about how universities, used to build their reputations.
Oh, yeah.
It was all about academics.
Right.
The big research breakthroughs, the famous professors, like that's what made a university's name. But now it feels different. It's not just about the academics anymore. There's this whole other layer of, well, how do they work with themselves? How do they present themselves to the world? It's like the degree itself is only one piece of the puzzle now.
You're absolutely right. It really feels like the game has changed. I think universities are really having to step up their game. It's not enough to just be good at what they do anymore. They have to show it, tell their story in a really compelling way. And that's where all this emphasis on marketing and brand management comes in.
Exactly. And that's what we wanted to dig into today. This whole trend of universities really focusing on their brand, how they're perceived. We've been seeing it more and more, right? In articles and discussions. We thought it was time to kind of unpack it, figure out why it's happening and what it means for these institutions moving forward.
I think it's a really fascinating shift because for a long time there was almost like a resistance, to thinking of universities as brands in the way that, say, a company would.
Right, like it was almost beneath them or something.
Exactly, like it would somehow cheapen the academic mission.
Right.
But I think that perception is changing, and fast.
So to really understand this shift, we've gathered a whole bunch of different perspectives. We'll be looking at how universities are now bringing in like dedicated brand experts, some of the big marketing trends that are predicted to really take off in education, specifically by 2025. We'll also explore this concept of attracting students through valuable content, which is something we see a lot, especially for smaller schools. And then there's a whole challenge of connecting with Gen Z, the next generation of learners. They have their own unique way of interacting with the world.
Absolutely.
And then there's the question of online visibility. Like, how do universities make sure they stand out in this huge digital landscape?
Yeah.
And then finally, the ever-present challenge of just cutting through all the noise, all the marketing messages that are constantly bombarding everyone these days. It's a lot to consider.
It is, and it really speaks to how competitive the landscape has become,
Yeah.
It's not just about offering a good education anymore. It's about making sure that message is heard and it resonates.
Exactly. It's about adapting to this new environment. But it's also about meeting the expectations of these new students, understanding what they're looking for in a university experience.
Right.
So I guess a good starting point is this whole idea of universities bringing in dedicated brand managers.
Yeah, like their own in-house experts.
Right, like they're taking a page from the corporate playbook here. And it seems like a relatively new thing.
It is. In the business world, brand managers have been around for ages. They're the ones who shape how a company is perceived, protect its image, make sure the messaging is consistent. But higher education is just starting to catch up.
And we actually had a chance to speak to Beth Fritzinger, who's a brand manager at Johns Hopkins University, JHU.
Oh, interesting.
She really shed some light on what this role entails. And it's not just about the visual stuff, right? Like the logo and colors. It's much broader than that.
Yeah, it's much more strategic, right? It's about shaping an overall experience of the university. It's about creating a cohesive identity.
Yeah. So one of the core things that Fritzinger highlighted was developing and maintaining brand guidelines. This includes the visuals, sure, but also the messaging. How does the university talk about itself? How does it position itself in the world?
Yeah.
And it's all about making sure that communication is consistent, whether it's on their website, in their brochures, on social media, wherever. And I thought it was so smart. Like JHU has a whole section on their website dedicated to these guidelines.
Oh, that's great.
So easy to find. It's like they're saying, here's how we do things. Let's all be on the same page.
That's so important for clarity, right?
Yeah.
And accessibility. Anyone can just go and see, okay, this is the brand, this is how we do it.
Exactly. And it's not enough to just have these guidelines, People actually have to use them. And that's where the whole education and advocacy piece comes in. Fritzinger was really passionate about that. It's about actively training faculty and staff on the university's branding principles. Like she even had this great quote from her time at the University of Iowa. She said, make it easy for people to do the right thing when it comes to branding. It's a really human-centered approach,
Yeah, because most people want to represent the university well.
Right.
They just need to be given the tools and the know-how.
Absolutely. And then you have the strategic alignment aspect. Like, universities are these big, complex organizations.
Yeah.
You've got admissions, you've got alumni relations, all the different academic departments, and they all have to be singing from the same hymn sheet, right?
Yeah, it's about making sure everyone's pulling in the same direction.
Exactly. And that's a big part of what the brand manager does, like working with all these different internal teams to make sure their communications align with the overall university brand strategy. It's about creating this unified voice.
That's so important for consistency, right?
Yeah.
Because the outside world doesn't necessarily see all those different departments. They see the university as a whole.
Exactly. And to help with all of this, brand managers are also responsible for managing the actual brand assets. So this is things like templates for presentations, image libraries, even guidelines for things like, branded merchandise.
Yeah.
It's about giving people the tools they need to easily create materials that are, on brand.
Makes it much easier for everyone.
Yeah. And then finally, a huge part of the role is supporting reputation management and storytelling. This is about shaping how the university is perceived, telling its story in a way that's compelling and resonates with potential students, with donors, with the community at large. It's about building that trust and credibility.
And shaping the narrative.
Right, because a strong brand does so much more than just, look pretty.
Oh, yeah.
It really builds trust, strengthens the university's reputation, and ultimately, it leads to a much more positive experience for the students, from the very first moment they encounter the institution.
It's about building that emotional connection, right?
Yeah.
Making people feel like they belong, like they're part of something special.
And JHU actually provides a really good example of this with their 10-for-1 strategic framework. It's basically an initiative to unite all their different schools and divisions under this cohesive one university brand. And Fritzinger even said, quote, JHU is one of the most trusted names in higher education, and we realized we were missing opportunities to fully leverage that reputation. So it's about being really strategic and making the most of what they already have.
That's smart, right? Like they're saying, we've got this incredible asset, our reputation, let's really put it to work.
Exactly. And, it's funny, Fritzinger also told this great story about how the facilities team at JHU, like the people who maintain the buildings, they took it upon themselves to paint all the stair rails in the specific JHU blue.
Yeah.
Like nobody asked them to do it. They just knew it was part of the university's identity.
Oh, wow.
That's how much the brand has permeated the culture there. It's not just a marketing thing. It's part of who they are.
That's a great sign, right? It shows that the brand is really ingrained.
It really is.
Yeah.
So the question is, why are we seeing this sudden focus on brand management in higher education?
Yeah.
Like, why now?
Yeah, good question.
And Fritzinger pointed out that historically, universities haven't really thought of themselves as brands in the same way that, businesses do.
Right. They've been more focused on their academic mission, which is important, of course.
Of course. But the world has changed,
Yep.
It's way more competitive now, both for students and for funding. And I think universities are realizing that a strong brand is no longer just a nice to have, it's a necessity.
Yeah, it's essential for survival, really.
As Fritzinger put it, quote, in the past, universities shied away from thinking like businesses. But at the end of the day, branding helps us communicate our value to students, faculty, and donors.
Yeah.
And, there's also the practical reality that most university communications teams are already stretched thin.
Yeah.
So having a dedicated brand manager really allows them to keep that brand strategy front and center.
Makes a lot of sense.
But of course, managing a brand within higher education has its own unique set of challenges.
Oh, yeah, I bet. It's a whole different beast.
Fitzinger mentioned that one of the biggest hurdles is just the sheer size and complexity of these institutions. Like JHU, for example, their last major rebrand was in 2013, and now they're gearing up for their 150th anniversary in 2026.
Yeah.
So the brand has to be flexible enough to encompass new academic programs, evolving research areas, even their physical expansion across different locations. It's a lot to keep track of.
It's about finding that balance,
Yeah.
right? Between consistency and adaptability. You want to have a strong, recognizable brand, but you also need to be able to evolve with the times.
Exactly. And then there's the challenge of catering to all the different stakeholders. You've got undergrad and grad programs, research centers, the medical school, alumni, donors, each with their own specific needs and communication styles. The brand manager has to find a way to make everyone feel included while still maintaining that overall brand consistency.
That's the art of it, I guess.
Right, it's a balancing act. And I was really impressed with the resources that JHU provides to support this. They have a whole brand resources page on their website.
Oh.
Yeah. It has everything. Downloadable design elements, a photo library, templates, font guidelines, brand training materials, a editorial style guide, even information on trademark licensing. It's like this one-stop shop for anyone who needs to create something on brand.
That's super helpful.
Yeah,
Really takes the guesswork out of it.
totally. So looking ahead, Fritzinger thinks these brand management roles are only going to become more common in higher education.
Yeah.
She even predicts we might start seeing, like, director of brand positions.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and more specialized roles within brand teams in the next 5 to 10 years.
Makes sense as the field matures.
Yeah. And she also sees a much greater emphasis on accessibility and branding, moving beyond just the visual elements to consider things like color contrast for visually impaired users and making sure materials are inclusive in terms of both design and language.
That's great to hear. Accessibility should be a top priority for everyone.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting to hear about JHU's approach to incorporating AI into their branding efforts. They've actually set up a whole task force to develop recommendations. They're being very cautious about it, making sure they're using AI appropriately while also ensuring that their communications staff have enough human resources so they don't feel like they have to rely solely on AI. It's a really balanced approach.
Yeah, it's about using AI as a tool, not a replacement for human expertise.
Exactly. And finally, Fritzinger had some really good advice for other marketing professionals in higher education. She said, make branding easy. Find that sweet spot between tradition and innovation. Remember that branding is everyone's responsibility, not just the marketing departments, and invest in brand governance.
That's good advice.
Yeah. So it gives us a pretty good overview of this whole rise of the university brand manager. But let's zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture. The Higher Education Marketing Institute actually put out some predictions for the top marketing trends in education for 2025. And a lot of it connects really well with what we've just been talking about.
Oh, I'd love to hear about that.
So unsurprisingly, they also predict continued growth in dedicated brand manager roles. But they also highlight the increasing importance of what's called inbound marketing. This is particularly relevant for smaller private schools that are, trying to boost their enrollment. It's a way of attracting students by providing valuable content that they're actually looking for.
Right. It's about drawing people in organically rather than just pushing messages out.
Exactly. And they also predict that connecting with Gen Z students is going to require a totally different approach.
Yeah.
They're all about personalized, authentic content delivered through social media and even influencer collaborations. It's a world away from how universities used to reach out to students.
Gen Z is a whole different generation, right? They grew up online.
Yeah.
They can spot a fake a mile away.
Totally. And they're also predicting that data analytics is going to play a huge role in shaping education marketing strategies. It's not enough to just put stuff out there anymore. You have to track what's working, understand your audience, and adjust your approach accordingly.
Data is king these days.
Right. And interestingly, they also touched on some more controversial topics, like whether the increasing investment in brand managers might come at the expense of academic programs, and also the role of social media influencers in education marketing, which is a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, those are definitely going to be hot topics for discussion.
So let's dive into some of these strategies a little more, starting with inbound marketing, which, as we said, is becoming really crucial for smaller private schools.
Yeah.
A lot of these institutions are facing huge enrollment pressures, and traditional outreach just isn't cutting it anymore.
Yeah, I can see that.
So inbound marketing is all about understanding what your target audience is actually looking for. What are their pain points?
Right.
What questions do they have? And then creating content that directly addresses those needs. This could be helpful blog posts, informative videos, downloadable guides, anything that provides real value.
Right.
And then you use things like personalized email marketing to nurture those relationships and keep people engaged. And a big part of this is leveraging content created by current students and alumni. Because let's be honest, those peer recommendations carry a lot of weight, especially in today's world.
Oh, yeah, especially for Gen Z. They're all about authenticity and hearing from people they can relate to.
And speaking of Gen Z, there was a really great article in Advanced Education about how to effectively market to this next generation of learners.
Interesting.
And the key takeaway was, again, authenticity. You have to understand their digital habits, where they hang out online, what kind of content they respond to, and create strategies that feel personalized and genuine.
Makes sense.
Social media, influencer collaborations, user-generated content, those are all huge for this generation.
Yeah, they practically live online.
Exactly. And the article also highlighted the value of developing what they call student personas. It's basically creating these detailed profiles of your ideal student. What are their interests? What are their goals? What are their concerns? And then you use those insights to tailor your messaging.
That's smart. It makes the marketing more targeted and effective.
Right. And they also stress the importance of actually involving current students in the content creation process.
Yeah.
Because who better to speak to prospective students than the people who are actually living the experience?
Absolutely. It brings that realness, that credibility.
Totally. And then, of course, there's the whole question of SEO, search engine optimization. This came up in a discussion on the Enrollment Clinic podcast.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. I mean, SEO is crucial for any organization these days, but especially for universities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's surprising how many are still missing the boat on this. Like, they pointed out that 67% of prospective students start their college search online. That's the vast majority.
Wow, that's huge.
And yet, over half of universities don't have a clear SEO strategy. It's a major disconnect.
That's a missed opportunity.
Yeah, big time. So, what are some of the key things universities need to focus on? Well, optimizing their website content with relevant keywords, making sure their website is user-friendly and easy to navigate, and building those backlinks, which are basically like votes of confidence from other credible websites.
Right. It's all about building authority, showing Google that you're a trusted source of information.
Exactly. And then there's the whole thing about optimizing for voice search. More and more people are using things like Siri and Alexa
Yeah.
and making sure their websites are mobile friendly because let's be honest, most people are browsing on their phones these days. And the expert even talked about how AI is influencing SEO now. Like it's favoring content that's written in a clear conversational style.
That's interesting. So no more stuffy academic jargon.
Right. And finally, we can't talk about education marketing without addressing marketing fatigue.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
This was a topic discussed by EAB, and it's the idea that students are just bombarded with so many marketing messages that they start tuning them out.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's experiencing that these days, not just students. It's information overload.
Totally. And EAB even cited the statistic that the average person sees something like 5,000 ads every single day. And when you think about how many universities and programs are out there, it's no wonder students are feeling overwhelmed.
It's a lot to process.
So how do universities combat this? Well, EAB suggests really focusing on personalization, like using data to make sure students are seeing messages that are actually relevant to them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And aligning all their marketing with their core mission and values.
That's about authenticity.
Exactly. And constantly refreshing their ad creatives, A/B testing to see what works best, and even strategically managing platform fatigue. This means potentially pausing advertising on certain platforms if they get too saturated.
That's smart. You don't want to keep hitting people over the head with the same message.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they also highlighted the importance of cultivating what they call high-intent-led sources. This means focusing on students who have already shown some interest in the university.
Right, so it's more about quality than quantity.
Exactly. So taking all of this together, it's clear that we're seeing a huge shift in how educational institutions are approaching marketing.
Yeah, it's becoming much more strategic.
Right. It's not just an afterthought anymore. It's a core part of their strategy for attracting students and building their reputation. And we're seeing this emphasis on branding, the need for personalized and inbound marketing, the importance of connecting with Gen Z on their terms, the crucial role of SEO, and the constant challenge of overcoming marketing fatigue.
It's about adapting to this new landscape and really understanding what students want and need.
Exactly. And ultimately, it feels like the future of education marketing is about being genuinely student-centric and building authentic relationships. So here's a question for you to think about. Given all these changes we've discussed, what do you see as the single most important shift that universities need to make to not just survive, but thrive in this new world?
Ooh, that's a good one.
And for students who are navigating this increasingly complex world of university marketing, how can they cut through all the noise and figure out which institutions are truly a good fit for them? It's a two-way street.
Absolutely.
Universities have to adapt, but students have to be savvy too.
That's a great point.